So let's talk about now you're beginning to frame up. You're a child of the 60s. How was that impacting your life once that came up? I mean, I was not here in the States. I was out of the country. How was that beginning to frame your attitude, your vision of what you saw for your life?
Well, a lot of things were going on during my high school years. One, I was back in Catholic school, Catholic high school, after a couple of years in public school. My parents decided Catholic school is better for her. So back in Catholic high school. And it was a time when within the church, even the nuns were questioning a lot of things about the church doctrine. And we were having all of these folk masses and just a real going away from the rigid Catholic doctrine. So actually a lot of the nuns that taught me in high school ended up leaving the convent, and that was a big influence on me and my thinking about religion. My mother, when my youngest sister started first grade, my mother, who had always volunteered at hospitals, decided that she wanted to go back and be a nurse. And so she went back to school to get her practical nursing degree and then her full nursing degree and then her master's. So this is mother of 6 children, goes back to school and does all of that. That was a huge influence.
Was that a shock to you when your mother made that decision? I mean, did you ever see that coming?
It was a shock. I really didn't think that she would go from volunteering to actually wanting to go back to school. And then the real shock was that her mother, my grandmother, who was German, came to live with us, and the house was ruled by a German tyrant for my junior year of high school, which was very shocking. But in the same period of time, my parents were very strict, so they were very limited in what I could do. I never owned a pair of blue jeans until I went to college. It was just very, very different. And when I went to college, I graduated from high school in 1969, and I went to college. My parents sent me off with this wonderful suitcase with all the right college clothes. And I remember coming back the first time, and I came back with torn blue jeans, a shirt I'd got at Sonny's Surplus store, this felt hat with a scarf around it, and sandals. And I remember my father looking at me thinking, what happened to my daughter? There was so much more freedom in college. I remember when I went for the interview, I went to Smith College, and when I went for the interview, at that time Smith had parietals that limited the times that boys could be in the dorm and girls had to be back in the dorm at a certain time. And when we were going on the college interview, the tour guide took me aside and said, but next year it's 24-hour parietals. So it means anything can happen anytime, there are no restrictions. So it was an incredible freeing time to go from this very strict Catholic family to going to college, being completely on my own, and knowing that I could do anything, go anywhere, nobody was paying attention to me.
How did you feel about that? I mean, because I know what it's like to be brought up in a rigid family and with a lot of structure. And it's the same thing, we're Italian, German, and I always ask the question, who would let Italians and Germans get married? I mean, you got to think about it. It just is wrong. I mean, you got all this and this together. But how did you feel when you began to see this emerging change? Did you have a sense that change was coming? What was your sense? Because it really was this amazing time.
It was, and I'm not sure that I appreciated it as much. I reveled in it. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and for me, it was, breaking free from a lot of rules and regulations. I think my brother, who was a year older than me, he was at the University of Michigan, and he was there in a track and swimming scholarship. In our family, the boys got the athletic scholarships and the girls had to get the academic, so Michael did just fine. And he reveled in it as well. But it really opened my eyes to a lot more about the world, because what happened the spring of my first year at college was the Kent State Massacre. Smith College shut down. Everybody was protesting the war. All of our classes, to the extent they were classes, were held outside, and they were all discussion groups about the pros and cons of war. We wore black armbands. We went over to the University of Massachusetts and marched on the campus. And it just opened my eyes to a lot of issues. Not my parents. My parents were astonished to find out that my classes were canceled, that I was wearing a black armband, and that I was participating in all these activities. But for me, it started me thinking in a bigger picture about my whole social environment. And at that point, I started thinking, maybe I don't want to be a teacher, maybe I want to be a social worker and change the world. I want to do something that really has an impact. So it did affect my thinking.
Interesting. And I keep hearing, going back to your brother, what does your brother do now?
Well, my brother's an interesting story. He actually dropped out of Michigan and then went back to get his degree. But he decided his degree was in psychology and Far Eastern religion. Not very marketable, but that's my brother. He too was a thinker and was very influenced by the 60s. So he ended up going into retail, and he's actually down in Charlotte, North Carolina, and is manager of a retail chain of stores.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Are you still really close? Do you see
We are. I mean, one of the great things about my family, and the reason why I always wanted to have a large family, is we are very close. And every summer we get together for a week at the beach, and everybody comes with their kids. Whenever there's a family weekend at one of our nieces or nephews' college, we all try and go there. They were all there for my son's first communion and high school graduations and college graduations. And we email each other constantly, so we're a very close family. And I can, if anything happened, I could call my brother, and he'd be here in a heartbeat.
That's really great. It's amazing how those experiences, along with our siblings, are just as important as what our parents are teaching us and all the other things that happen. And we've heard that story a lot as we've talked to other people, that how important that sibling relationship is, and how there's always one that seems like they're getting off a little bit easier than the other one.
Yes, there was that.
And it's very common that we have who's the eldest child begins to take a leadership role, especially for women.
And it's interesting because my older brother, Michael, was also a terrible driver, and he got his license, and he was allowed to use the family car, which he promptly wrecked at least 3 times. I got my license, and I was not allowed to use the family car. I had to just wait, a couple of years, and Michael was the one who had to drive me around. And what's really interesting is when I was 6 months old, I won a car. My grandfather put my name on a church raffle ticket.
I thought, okay.
And I won a car. I still have the title, to MaureenEDwyer2. I was 6 months old, which I turned, of course, over to my parents, being the generous child I was. And so when it came time for me to drive, I said, not only should I be driving the family car, but I think you owe me a car. And my dad was like, go down to the junkyard if you really want it, it's there.
So let's talk about what was happening to you as you entered college, because you had these skill sets, you learned to type. So what were you doing? Did your parents just give you a full ride and pay for everything for all 6 kids to go to college?
Oh, no. It was all scholarship. It was all scholarship. So I went to Smith on scholarship, and I had a campus job that I also worked at. And then every vacation when I came home, I was a secretary again. In the summers, I was a secretary. So that was the way we put ourselves through college. And the summers were really our spending money. And in college, as I said, I was thinking of moving from teaching to social work. And then I took this seminar with one of my sociology professors, and she invited her husband in, who worked for the Public Defender's Office or Children's Welfare Fund or something up there in Massachusetts. And he started talking about his work as a poverty lawyer and representing indigents and helping them with their legal issues. And I thought, well, gosh, that's a really good area to go into. It's sort of a combination of this social work and then this law. And to backtrack, when I was in high school, my father and I would get into arguments. And my father, when we'd argue, said, you should be a lawyer. And he nicknamed me Portia from The Merchant of Venice. And that was his nickname for me. So in college, everything was coalescing, and I thought, well, this makes sense. I can change the world through law. I can, go to law school, and this will be my career. And to me, it was beginning to sound a lot better than just going into teaching. It was something that would be a little bit different and more of a mark on society and myself, I guess.
Were there a lot of women in law school at that time? What were the numbers looking like?
No, there were a lot that actually were applying. I think when I went to law school, there was probably about a third to maybe 40% women. So the numbers were increasing at that time. And initially what happened is I took the law boards and thought I did terribly. So I wrote the Educational Testing Service and said, cancel sending my scores to all these schools because I know I did terribly and I don't want them to see my scores. I'm not going to apply to law school. And then I got my scores and they were okay. So then I wrote ETS and said, okay, change my mind, send them to the schools. Well, ETS never got that second message, so I'm graduating from college, I'm waiting to hear from law schools, all my friends are hearing, and I'm not, and I'm going crazy. And so, of course, I called my dad and said, I don't know what's going on, and I've been on the phone with ETS, and they can't seem to fix it. So he took a day off from work and drove down to Princeton, New Jersey, and met with them to fix it and make sure that everything worked out. That was my dad. And what happened is I got telegrams from the law schools saying that I was accepted and what my scholarship was. And at the same time, I had applied for a job through Smith College's placement office as a paralegal in a law firm in New York. And I decided that I would work for a year as a paralegal in a law firm and hold off on law school for a year. And that's what I decided to do.
Sometimes it's interesting how something that has the appearance of a disaster, lessons here, we're learning
Right.
Appearance of a disaster is actually good fortune. And even though at the time, because it was framing decision making you were making at the time. So you worked as a paralegal, and what kind of law were you working in? What kind of law firm?
The name of the law firm was Donovan Leisure, Newton and Irvine. It was an antitrust litigation firm, and their offices were right at Rockefeller Center on the 33rd through 36th floors of that building. And what was interesting is they were also working on a case for Kodak, and so a lot of their first-year lawyers, they shipped up to Rochester, New York to do document review. And so they had a lot of empty offices, and for the first time they were hiring paralegals. So I got a window office overlooking Rockefeller Center, the skating rink in the winter, the cafe in the summer, and I remember sitting in that office thinking, I could do this kind of law. I think maybe I could work in a firm like this instead.
So I could be with the poor people and not have an office with a window. Or you have an office with a window.
Well, one of the things that I was realizing even at that time from conversations with some of the lawyers is that you can have your social interests served in your pro bono or community service activities and then have your main profession be a little bit different. And there were a lot of lawyers that I met when I was working at the firm who were very involved in charitable organizations, and I went to different events and activities, and I began to see that there was a way of doing that without saying I'm going to be a poverty lawyer. The other good thing about working at the firm was that I met my husband, my first husband, and at that time, it was very interesting. There were very few women lawyers in the firm. I think maybe there were 3 out of probably 200 lawyers, but there were a lot of these women paralegals, and so the male lawyers felt that, gee, we can go out with the women paralegals. They're okay to go out with because there aren't that many women lawyers, and so there were these groups of people that would go out after work, and it was just a lot of fun. It was just a really good experience for a year. And I was living on the Upper East Side with 3 other girls, and it was just a really fun time to be in New York.